This next panel is The Brain Economy in the Age of AI. It's moderated by Andy Keller, who is a PhD. He is the president and CEO of the Meadows Institute, where he leads efforts to advance policy and solutions addressing the nation's mental health crisis. A clinical and community psychologist with more than 25 years of experience, he specializes in aligning health policy, financing, and care delivery to improve outcomes for individuals and communities. Please welcome to the stage Andy Keller and his panel on the brain economy in the age of AI.
Do we have to sit under our pictures? Is that like a rule? I guess. That might help people. It might be more fun to not, though. Hey, everybody, welcome. So I've been really excited about this panel since I talked to David and found out the chance that I get to be part of it, because we're going to learn a lot, because we have four amazing people up here who are coming at this age of AI and the brain economy from four very synergistic but pretty distinct perspectives. So we're going to kind of jump right in. And I think the thing I want to kind of highlight for you to watch for here is that there's two things I need you to take from this conversation. One of them is I need you to take the things that often we get pulled into as psychologists and mental health professionals and brain professionals, which is worry that our children and our vulnerable folks within the community are going to somehow have adverse impacts from the impact of AI, and that's true. And I think we want to take that away. But we also have, I think, one of the most wonderful and hopeful opportunity of my career to be able to finally tackle, with the help of AI, some of the complexities that have kept us from advancing solutions and flourishing in healthcare and mental health as quickly as we have, and brain health more broadly for the rest of the physical health world. So I'm super excited about this panel. And we're just going to jump right in. You have everybody's bio. I'm going to say a little bit about each person as I ask questions, but I'm going to let them really talk to you about their work. And that really is the first question. And I'm going to go all the way down to the end to Michelle, who's representing the hometown team here. And we each have one of these, I think. Actually, can we pass one down? Then we will all have one. Okay, you got one. Okay, good. Michelle from UT Health here in Houston, McGovern School of Medicine. Michelle, you are anchoring for the Department of Psychiatry in an array of capacities, the AI agenda. So congratulations on that. And I'd love you to share with everybody what gives you the most hope, and how is that impacting your work and your institution's work currently?
Well, I think really trying to spearhead AI or digital mental health, it's a blessing and a curse, I think, too, which is kind of what you're alluding to. There's pros and cons of this. And the most important thing is that we weigh the evidence and we understand the evidence that occurs right now, right? And we try to stay as current as possible and as cutting edge as we can and forward thinking and all of that. And that's my job, is try to think, come to events like this to really understand that. I think from a UT Health perspective and for the Department of Psychiatry, one of our biggest opportunities and the thing that we work on really hard is to understand all levels of mental health care. I really appreciate one of the prior speakers who alluded to inpatient psychiatry and inpatient mental health. I think sometimes when we say mental health, we forget there are different levels of mental health care. We have our traditional outpatient, which UT Health Psychiatry has, but we also have more intensive levels of care, which all impact the brain economy. So our traditional level of mental health care and outpatient is important, but we often neglect, like the prior speaker said, these other levels, and that's what we're committed to, is at every level of mental health care, improving patient outcomes with digital mental health, AI, really thinking about data, measurement-based care moving forward.
Which is pretty exciting. That's so cool. I'm just going to go in order, just because that's easy. So Laura, so great to see you, and it's so cool to see you in a new capacity added. Your work at Hopkins and all the work you've done on CETA around evidence-based care and the common elements. It's so cool to have you now at Google and working on Gemini and heading up global mental health. Can you, kind of the same question, like what gives you in the age of AI hope, and how is your current work intersecting with that and furthering that?
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you. And let's see. The thing that gives me the most hope, I think, is the treatment gap. And that may be a little counterintuitive, but I've spent so much of my career at Hopkins talking about, 70, 80% of the world doesn't have access to mental health care. I would venture to say you raise that to 95 if we're talking about quality mental health care that isn't on a wait list. And I think that AI has changed some of the math in we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough training to change the story there. At Hopkins, we did develop this transdiagnostic system that can streamline, and then we layered AI on top of it to really come up with precision-based care like cancer did. And now we've created something called the evidence-based simulator, essentially a multi-agent simulator for learning how to do evidence-based care. So AI has really given opportunities to change some of that treatment gap. At Google, I have a very different perspective, right? With billions coming to healthcare, and I just got a notice today that every week the amount of people that come to technology for mental health care increases. And I think the sobering thing for me is that that should be a sign to all of us that our ecosystem of mental health care is not good. Even though technology is not ideal at all, this is where they're going to because they're on a six month, or as Steve Carnival said, 18-month waiting list. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for technology to partner with the wider ecosystem and the brain capital movement to build a better system together and help be the front gate that does better triaging.
Well, that's very hopeful, and that's a wonderful way to frame that. Jamie, I think you win the award on the stage for coming the farthest to today's meeting. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm so excited to hear your perspective, too, with your work with your foundation and your work looking at the impact of AI on brains. I know you're going to give us some cautionary tales here in a bit, but I am very excited about what is the thing that gives you hope? What is the thing that excites you, and how does that intersect with your work?
So I would say AI, as we all know, it's a force multiplier. So it really allows the human to actually achieve more in multiple ways. You were talking before about the shortage of clinicians across the world, and we see as well how hospitals and health institutions that are using AI are allowing doctors to actually see more double or not, if not triple the patients. But I would say when it comes to mental health, we see that it can have a very positive impact in multiple ways. We can see, for example, digital companions or mental health companions that are allowing clinicians and therapists, especially for people with mild to moderate mental health disorders that don't have access to a clinician every single day, to have some sort of treatment. We see as well therapists using AI as a clinical tool. And also I would say when it comes to brain-computer interfaces, that's extremely exciting. China just announced the first successful brain implant in China in a human this week. And I would say the potential there, it's huge. On the flip side, it's true as well that with AI, what we are not measuring right now is what's the impact of cognition in the human population at scale. That's why I built the Brain Future Foundation, what we call the solution called CogniGuard, in order to really measure and track what's the impact of AI on humans' cognitive abilities. We'll talk about that in a second.
Which I'm very glad you're tracking that. Arthur, so glad you're here today, and you're at such an interesting position to leading the American Psychological Association. You're looking at the policy world, you're looking at the services that are delivered by psychologists and other allied health professionals, you're looking at the research and the science. From that vantage, as you think about your work and where it intersects, what are the things that give you the most hope about this age of AI?
Well, I think we have to start with where are we at with AI? And if you think about AI as being the biggest intervention on our brain health in the history of humanity, then it really helps you understand what both the opportunity is and what some of the challenges are. So there are two things that I think are important. One is that we have an opportunity, if we take it, to really impact on the development of AI. Our field, and I'm going to say the mental health field, the brain economy field, we were caught sleeping on the issue of social media. We saw the early signs that social media was going to have a negative impact on youth mental health, but because we're good scientists, we stepped back and said, we don't have the meta-analysis, we don't have the decades of research, we don't have X to really intervene in the way that we should have intervened. And so now we had to play catch up. The good news is that we learned from that, and with AI, I think our field is really poised. Certainly at the American Psychological Association, we're poised to get into the game much sooner and to affect how these technologies are developed. And I think there are two ways that we are interested in doing that. One is that we know that these technologies can have an impact, a negative impact on human cognition, on social development, social attachment. When a sycophantic technology interacts with a youth that is developing their social skills, it's going to impact on their social development. So we know that those kinds of impacts are there, that we as a field need to speak up about what those potential harms are and work with the tech industry to mitigate them. And we're doing that at APA. On the other hand, we can put an insert into these technologies, things that can help promote health, human flourishing. Using the analogy of fluoride in the water, what are the things that we know from behavioral science that we can insert into these technologies so that they're not only not harming, but they're actually helping to promote health and well-being? On the other hand, so there's some things that we can do around the technology itself that I think can be really impactful. On the other hand, the field has had a lot of challenges that we have not been able to solve. Less than half the people who have a mental health challenge in the US are going to receive any kind of care. And while the technology isn't at the point where it can do therapy or replace a clinician, there are a lot of things that it can do that will help, especially if we're looking at it from the perspective of population health, where we're trying to increase mental health literacy, we're trying to increase behavioral activation. Those are things that AI can do really, really well. So if we're trying to get upstream as a field, we now have a technology that allows us to do that at scale. And I think the question is, are we going to lean into it or we're not? But if we do, I think we have an enormous opportunity to have a huge impact on brain health of the nation.
That's exciting. I want to start with Jamie for this next round of questions if I can, because you alluded to this in your work on looking at the impact of AI on cognition, on the brain, and I do think we need to think about and spend some time dwelling in what are the concerns and what are the things that are kind of keeping us up at night thinking, man, if we don't deal with this, because as Arthur said, this is the biggest experiment on the brain ever unleashed, and nobody, I guess, we didn't get consent. It's just happening. So what are the things, Jamie, that you're concerned about? And then also, if you could, what are some of the mitigating factors, the solutions that you think people should keep in mind? Because you don't want to just upset these people. You want to also give them a little bit of what can they do about that.
Absolutely. So the first thing, there's not a single thing that keeps me up at night. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic event or moment in which AI is going to become so capable that it's going to replace humans or it's going to negatively impact human cognition. I'm concerned about all those million tiny moments in which we silently start outsourcing our human cognition and our own skills to AI. The time in which we decide to actually use AI to send a letter to our mom, or to actually perform a piece of research, or eventually to solve a problem. That's when silently those skills are starting to degrade. And the way I see AI as the most transformative technology ever is that we're facing right now a similar situation that the US and Oppenheimer were facing 80 years ago when they were facing the dilemma of how to contain that powerful technology. I don't think AI is going to kill us. We're not going to have a Terminator moment. That's not going to happen. But again, there's a risk of it silently started replacing us. If we start delegating and over-delegating on AI what makes us human, which is critical thinking, which is creativity, even social connection, that's again when those abilities or those skills are going to degrade, and that's when we get into what is called cognitive offloading, cognitive rot, skill atrophy, and that's what we need to prevent. The challenge is that there's not enough evidence yet. they're starting to appear a little bit from MIT Media Lab, from Microsoft, Anthropic, Google as well, that actually prove that there's a bit of a negative correlation between heavy AI usage and critical thinking. And that is concerning. In the same way that people is starting to outsource moral and reasoning and moral judgment already to AI. So that means that we need to contain it somehow. And we need to start thinking about building a cognitive infrastructure when we use AI. That's what we started doing in this case in CogniGuard with UCL. We're trying to build the first framework that can precisely measure what's the impact, the cognitive impact of AI in all of our decisions. So I believe that we need to also leverage initiatives like the Brain Economy Initiative in order to ensure that companies and governments start thinking about that cognitive layer when they keep pushing AI initiatives in their own either companies or organizations.
Well, I want to take the point Arthur made a minute ago about how we waited too long on the science for social media. I mean, what are some of your intuitions right now based on the measurement that you have been doing? I mean, like, I got kind of excited, by the way, when you said I could outsource writing letters to my mother, but I mean, I like my mom, but I'm not very good at it. So I mean, what do you think some of the early indicators are that you're seeing kind of emerging for what skills might be atrophying?
So the first thing is humans, they always prioritize short-term gains as opposed to mid to long-term negative consequences, and that's a risk. What we see is that when you actually provide them with a metacognition tool that guides them through the way they use AI tools and actually challenges them, and if you're actually going to upload a task to an AI, it tells you, hey, think about it for a second. Are you really sure you want to upload that critical decision? We were just talking about before that Apple is going to launch now their AI version of Siri, the real smart version of Siri. People all over the world, there's 2.5 billion Apple users. They're all going to start using Siri to do everything from asking what should they wear, what type of career to pursue, any decision they're going to upload it to an AI. So it's really critical to educate people on how to use those tools. There are also around 2 billion AI users, and just think about how many of them have actually received training on how to use responsibly AI tools. So it's true that when we think about Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, they're all thinking about a responsible AI layer, but that includes physical safety, that includes accountability, fairness. It doesn't include cognition. And that's the missing link, and that's what we should think about. And going back to your question, when we think about skills, definitely I would say creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. Those are probably the three ones that are being impacted the most, and the ones with so right now we're in beta phase, and we see that our users, what they're actually being most impacted on is on those three skills.
That makes sense. Laura, I want to go to you next if I can. He did allude to your current company, Google, and I know, I mean, and it is a pretty big responsibility having billions of people, you know. I remember actually talking to David Feinberg about like 10 years ago when he was at Google Health saying, you know, you all had quicker access to where flu outbreaks were than the CDC did because people would go say, what are the symptoms of flu? I imagine that's just so magnified now. So when you think about, you know, what gives you, particularly as you look at this job you're taking on, and you've been working with them for a while, but like, what are the things that you're going in and feeling like, gosh, I want to make sure we do something about this? And what are the things that you see maybe being at least initial answers on that?
Number one, I want to take from a Johns Hopkins hat and just say that I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is this rush to develop. Now everyone can develop their own everything, and there is no evidence behind it. So I think we have a whole new thing to think about outside of the Googles and the Metas and the Anthropics, that these things are being created. And if you go global, that is being done, you know, quite a bit and launched and whatnot. So in the world of mental health, that can be concerning. Putting on my Google hat, I think I have two things that come front of mind. One of them is that one of our biggest missions is to not have technology replace people in mental health. And so we do a lot of work thinking about how do we connect people with the outside world? How do we encourage that? How do we move them there? And I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is who's there? Who are we referring to? Because I will tell you, they come back on and they're like, I'm on a 10-month waiting list, or I can't find someone, or I have no funding for it. So I worry that we're trying to create sort of something in our silos again. I know this has been raised quite a few times, that technology is trying to do one thing, but then where does it lead to? And the third thing I'll say is, and both of you mentioned it, and Arthur, you raised it initially, but I think if we react in fear and bans, we're not going to be ready. I think the training, the upskilling, the knowing how to use it, the promoting of the good uses of it, rather than focusing on we're going to get rid of it, we're going to fear, we're going to ban it, I think is something that keeps me up at night. Is the movement I would rather see is let's get a strategy, let's get a framework, let's start teaching, let's start having ways to understand the good versus the bad.
Well, it sounds like implicit in that, though, is really a challenge to us who care about the brain economy, brain health, mental health, to step up to be those humans. I mean, do you see folks partnering and willing to partner to kind of help create that sort of human interface and partnership with Google as a technology company?
We do, and we welcome more. So it's like you said, it's one of the reasons we come here. We are very much interested in partnering in a much wider view of the ecosystem rather than functioning in silos.
Yeah, that makes sense. Arthur, can I bring it to you? Because, I mean, I think you've shared some cautionary thinking already, and I know, I mean, there's so much that psychology is doing to explore both these risks as well as, you know, help us move forward. But, I mean, looking across those things, what is the thing that keeps you up at night most? I mean, is there one thing, or is it like three things?
You know, when I was a kid, I used to like trucks. And I remember one Christmas, I get this truck, really excited, open it up, and it said, batteries not included. Now, you're wondering, why am I talking about that in a conversation about AI? Well, AI has the same problem. AI does not have the human layer in its stack. If you talk to engineers at AI, they can talk about what's they can talk about the chips that are used. They can talk about the model. They can talk about the data. They can talk about the human interface, and they have ways of measuring all of those things and talk a lot about it. What they can't talk about is what is the impact of this technology on people. What is it on, you know, Jamie, you were making a lot of good points about these technologies are going to affect our cognition. They're going to affect social development. They're going to affect a lot of places, a lot of aspects of our lives. And what worries me is that we will not recognize that we're receiving a technology with a missing layer that we have not fully articulated. And the thing that we can't afford is to wait to see what the impact is going to be to respond. We need to do that up front. So I think the issue that I worry most about is, are we going to respond quick enough? The technology, and I've listened to a lot of the tech leaders. The tech leaders will say, the technology, we have a really good handle on that. There are a lot of technical problems, but you know, the technology is really moving quickly. Our understanding of the technology on people isn't moving as quickly as the technological changes. So that's one of the things that I worry about. One of the things that we're doing with actually most of the AI companies, with Google, with Microsoft, with OpenAI, is having that conversation and articulating what are the things that we ought to be measuring, what are the things we ought to be thinking about. Some of the big challenges, for example, are some of the long-term longitudinal issues with the impact of the technology on youth, right? That's a really hard thing to measure because you need longitudinal studies, but we don't have the time to do longitudinal studies. So there's some real problems that we have to fix, but I'm very hopeful that in the conversations that we've been having, there's a recognition that there is that missing layer in the AI stack, that we have to figure out how to measure, and we also have to figure out how we intervene at that stack and at that layer in the stack. So I'm very hopeful, but I really want to make sure that we're paying enough attention to that issue.
Yeah, I love that. You know, Arthur, I want to ask a related question on that because You've been leading nationally in so many different forms on Capitol Hill, being asked to come in and advise congressional and Senate leaders. You and I had a chance last month to sit with some of our colleagues and talk to some of the Senate leaders and others who are working to try to have some sort of regulatory framework or some sort of way to, try to balance these things. What concerns you about that process?
Well, I really hope we don't, well, let me put it in a positive way. I hope we rely on the science. One of the things that we see around the world, people, if you're watching social media, is that politicians who want to do something, and I applaud them for that, will make arbitrary policy. So no one under the age of 16 is going to use social media, or no one under the age of 18. That is not based on science. It's not based on anything other than an arbitrary number. So what we've been talking to Congress about is we have to make these decisions based on good science. So that's number one. Number two is we have to get the data to make a lot of the decisions. If you think about where the research is, I think about it on a continuum. They're at one end of the continuum. We know some things very deeply. We've got decades of research, and there are other things that are really important that we don't have much data on. We're going to have to make decisions across that continuum. And so as a field, we're going to have to be much more comfortable with not having complete data, but we also are going to need to help inform the industry of the data that we need in order to make the right decisions. So I think there's a lot of work there, and I think at least the conversations we've been having is that there is an openness and understanding that we have to get a handle on the human aspects of the technology, especially given how quickly the technology is moving.
I love that. So, Michelle, you have such an interesting perspective compared to other folks here because you're looking at that national scene and the research scene, but you're also thinking, how does that affect folks here in Houston? And we have a lot of people from Houston here today. And so taking that lens, I mean, you go wherever you want with this, but I just feel like it's such a unique lens around the things that keep you up at night, the things that are concerning to you, but also, what do you see us able to do to try to mitigate that, to come together for that? What's most on your mind?
I think the thing that's most on my mind is actually our personal accountability in our use of AI. And I hear a lot of times people will say, we need to have the human in the loop, right? That's always a human in the loop with AI. And instead, I really like just flipping it and saying, no, AI is going to remain in the loop. You remain accountable for the work that you do, and the outputs that are generated. So if the outputs that are generated have hallucinations in them, right? We know that's a common thing, that you're accountable for that. If you use text, for example, that is from a large language model and it has errors in it, you're accountable for that. And you can't hide it. I'll say, actually, when we write research papers, if we're going to use AI, for me, I'm very conservative. I want to put ChatGPT as an author on that paper. So we are not going to use AI. So I said it, and I set that boundary and that safeguard. And I think we're learning a lot, like Arthur said, about the technical limitations of AI, right? Privacy issues. There's really beautiful papers written by John Torres, and we've collaborated with him on those, on safeguards around the technology. But what is the human process, not only at the system level, but the personal level? What are the things that each of us can do to ensure how we use AI is correct, right? The outputs are correct. The outputs are genuine, maybe. Maybe you don't want to write your letter to your mom with AI, right? It's a little disingenuous. She might not be able to tell, but I could tell if you wrote that. I have a very strong lens now for AI. When I see it now, and it's so funny, my 9-year-old son will say, you used AI for that. The kids on the unit, when I generate a drawing, or I generate for our child psychology group, I generate AI content a lot of times. I can make anything with it. I can make a CBT triangle that has dragons or unicorns, whatever they like. But sometimes the dragons have 5 tails, and I don't have time to go back through ChatGPT and change it again. And they'll be like, "You used AI for this, didn't you?" And they really don't like it. And they'll be like, don't do that, you know. So I think it's really interesting. And I think that's really what keeps me up is really outsourcing, like Jamie said, we outsource and then we don't check it, right? We are using it to be more efficient, yet what we're generating is either inaccurate, you can tell that you used AI for it, and you're not deeply thinking about that content. You generate it and you put it in an email. And like, you better believe it, if you use AI, which I feel like most people are now, you can tell. And I think that really keeps me up, especially when it comes to research and clinical care. If we're using those outputs, we have to be intensely scrutinizing them, maybe in a different way that we haven't been trained in before, as where training of like our next generation of mental health clinicians becomes so important. But that analytical thinking maybe needs to stay the same, but there's just a different tool to analyze and different outputs to analyze.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about as you talk about that, I'm remembering back to the conference that you put on in this room about 2 months ago on the part of the psychiatry department with Dr. Suarez and your team. You all brought together quite an array of folks thinking about how to do just those things. I mean, I feel like you're in the middle of so many solutions, and you're leading at UT Health Houston in those. I mean, what is one of the areas in particular you were most excited about from either that or kind of what you're doing to address that sort of the research intersection in particular, I feel like, but whichever you want to do.
Yeah, I was really, and of course Andy was there, so one of our esteemed panelists and speakers was also, Andy was here. And I think really the most powerful thing I took away from that conference was that whether you were in our bioinformatics school or nursing school or within psychiatry, or you were an engineer from another institution or policy, everyone had virtually the same, and no one had talked before, virtually the same idea that AI is a tool, right? That we as humans have to keep AI in the loop, and that's happening. That is, but we're in control. And we're in control of how we use it in education, and developing that human layer that Arthur talked about, that really is lagging. How do we develop that human layer to use the tool in the best way possible, really to generate a lot of these hopeful ideas, because there is so much hope if we take accountability for our role and our use of it, I think. Yeah.
That's so important. Okay, for this last question, which may be our last question, depends kind of how into it we get. I'm going to ask each of you to think about attention kind of across the different sectors that we're representing today and the different sectors that you see. And if you referred to one of your fellow panelists as part of that tension, that would actually be really fun. And then I'll give them a chance to respond. So I'm going to actually, Laura, let you go first. Looking at things from the perspective of, working in a technology company, but as a clinician, as a scientist, like what are the tensions between the policy, the clinical, the ethical, the scientific, personal, like what are the ones that have struck you, particularly in our conversation today, or one that you were just hoping we could talk about?
We don't have enough time, Andy.
I said one.
Right. As I think about this question, one of the tensions for me is policy related to, for example, training our workforce. It was raised earlier. How do we train them? We know we have workforce challenges in mental health. How do we upskill them? And one of the ideas out there is task sharing, using folks that are paraprofessionals to help us out with this. And one of the things we're seeing is that's being rolled out without really a policy or an implementation strategy. We don't really have plans for how do we train these paraprofessionals and how do we certify them. We're having trouble reaching the quality guidelines and licensed providers. And so there's a tension there of, again, in our wider ecosystem, really great solutions without sort of the policy, Arthur, coming alongside. And I'll just add one more thing with my Google hat on, and Google has a longtime partnership with APA, and it's the same type of thing that Arthur mentioned before also, is that we are fighting bans and I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. I mean, they just think this is hilarious when people try to say, like, you can't use it. They're like, oh, okay. Like, we are going to figure out how. So I wish some of these kids would go to some of these policy meetings because they're so savvy and they know so many workarounds and they think it's silly that we're going to write something on a paper that says this. And they're like, okay. So, but I think we work a lot with partners also to try to understand what are the concerns, because I do think politicians, as you said, they're trying to do something and they're trying to do something good. But maybe we're all in this unknown land and we don't exactly know what good is or how to give those safety guards within a safe space. And so I think that that is a policy tension right now that a lot of people are for the good trying to figure it out. But we're still working on it, I would say.
Yeah. Well, Arthur, she did use your name, though I did feel like you felt like maybe the two of you were sort of aligned in that work. I've heard a lot of alignment in that question, but I'm going to let you, Arthur, go wherever you want if you want to respond. But also,
deny.
Yeah, but Arthur, but if you could also
We're on
take the
the same
conversation,
page.
like the tensions you see, like what are the tensions like
Yeah.
that you see in this?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to talk about my field just for a moment. I think psychologists recognize some of the challenges that I mentioned. And I think one of the problems that creates is that our field, and I think this applies to more than just psychologists, can say there are problems with the technology. We should not work with those people. We should focus on controlling, regulating, banning, whatever it is.
Okay.
My view is that we have to work with the technology companies. The technology is here. It's not going away. My experience has been, with Google, with OpenAI, with, these companies, is that there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing. And we have the science collectively to help shape how these technologies get developed. So I think we have to resolve that tension. It's not an either or. Yes, there are protections that we have to make sure get implemented. But at the end of the day, these technologies are going to be with us. They're going to have a huge impact. We have a science that can help inform them, and I think we have to lean into that and make sure that we're bringing that science to the table. I also think we have to continue to educate policymakers and others that there is a science. We don't have to shoot in the dark. We don't have to do arbitrary work. There is knowledge that can be used and brought to bear so that we can make really intelligent decisions.
Could I just put one?
Yeah.
This brain capital, brain economy movement is so critical, I think, for what we are talking about because it puts such a larger framework on the longevity of this, the economics of it, everything we've heard today, I think makes these conversations easier because it's putting it into context. I don't know if you agree, Arthur.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you said that. I thought that, the creation of this whole brain economy, brain health initiative, the timing just could not have been better. I mean, if you think about AI as the largest experiment on the human brain ever, to have, a group of people who are organized around the idea of making sure that we protect brain health, I just think that the timing could not have been better. And so I'm very excited about that. I think we really ought to use this to drive the changes that we want to see.
Yeah. Jim, I'm just struck by the intersection with flourishing within that and how that fits with your work. And I mean, the tensions you're seeing and the opportunities and your panelists, please. weigh
Yes.
in.
So if we think about the AI ecosystem, the challenge is that everyone's thinking about it differently and is looking at different metrics and is measuring different things. So the tech companies are looking at token consumption and usage. Organizations, public and private, are looking at efficiency gains, productivity gains, and users, they just want efficiency. They just want convenience. So everyone's looking at this from a different lens. The challenge is that this also ties to the sense of urgency. And users don't have any sense of urgency. They don't think that their mental health is at risk by using AI tools. And that's something that's where they need more education and more awareness. And that's also why at CogniGuard, for example, what we've been talking multiple different organizations, and what we see that there's the highest level of urgency is, one, on educational institutions that are actually concerned that both K-12 students, for example, or university students or college students are not learning at the pace with the efficiency that they should. And they really want to provide a some sort of security layer that prevents, again, their users to not think and not really solve the problems and face the challenges that they would without AI. The other one is mental health organizations. They know that mental health patients are actually amplifying their issues with AI, and that poses a very big threat. So people is trying to contain, mental health organizations are trying to contain AI tools as much as they can. As you said, I think just banning is not the answer, or prohibiting AI usage is not the answer, but companies want to provide, again, some sort of layer that allows patients to securely use AI without it being an amplifier of their own mental disorders. So there's, I would say, the big tension, again, it's in the sense that everyone's measuring the same thing. And if you think about it, very few are probably measuring what matters, which is cognitive agency or cognitive health or brain health. And that's what we should also, with this Brain Economy Initiative, really focus on and ensure that politicians and corporations start looking or building an index that prevents poor AI usage in organizations.
I love that. Michelle, jump on in.
Okay. So I'm just thinking really about that human layer more. And I think one of the conflicts that seems most relevant, especially within what we're doing in inpatient and inpatient mental health, is that we really target and understand the problem of the end user, right? So the end user can be all sorts of different stakeholders. For us, the end user oftentimes is somebody who has been in inpatient settings. And when we think about developing the human side, we have got to understand what the real problem is. Something I think happens with AI or digital health tools, digital mental health tools, is that they are developed and it's very high tech, right? Lots of iterations on the prototype, everything, and the high touch human side, high touch protocol is not developed. And you actually don't understand the real problem. When you get to the end of the solution, you have no buy-in, right? You have actually significant costs that have been spent in order to develop it, and you actually have something that doesn't work for the problem that you are trying to solve, or has totally missed the mark. And so I think really understanding that lived experience. We have a lived experience board at the John S. Dunn Behavioral Health Sciences Center at UTL Houston. That's our title. And it's really intentional what we do there to collaborate. It's a non-hierarchical space. A physician and I lead it, and we use our first names, and we collaborate to truly understand the problems. And we have developed things, and they have said, absolutely not. It should not look like that. You're actually going to trigger people, for example, and we have totally changed it based off of their feedback and dramatically improved different things that we have developed. Because if someone, you can develop all the cool AI, all these neat models, and if someone doesn't use it in the way that improves their outcome, it does not matter. And sometimes they won't even use it at all. And so I think truly understanding the problem, I think we often miss that in technology. We develop all these really neat things, but we actually don't solve the problem, particularly in mental health. We don't solve the problem that needs to be solved. One of our lived experience board members for a tool we developed said, this is the best use of AI because it actually solves a problem that exists for patients. And that's what we should need to be focused on, I think.
Well, that really grounds us, and I think it really kind of puts us in a place to think about, like, what are we really trying to do here, and who are we really trying to help? And I think one really cool thing, in addition to how cool you all are as panelists, is how attentive and intelligent and good-looking this group of people is. So I'm wondering, before we let them go, if you could give a charge to the folks here today of something you'd like them to take away and something you'd like them to try to do to advance the more hopeful, impactful aspects of the age of AI, what would you tell them? And I'm just going to let you all jump in and see what order you go in. This is a bit of a social side. No, you just jump in and go.
I feel like in my new role, I'd like to say I'm a mom, I'm a parent, I'm a friend, so even though I work at Google, please don't see me as the enemy.
One of those people that Arthur was talking about? Yeah.
I I would love partnership out of this. Let's really start thinking about that whole system of care for mental health and even wider brain capital and how we can work together for the good rather than trying to fight the bad. Not that we're also not going to work to fix things.
I can go. There's a saying that I love that basically goes by or says that there are two types of people: the ones that use AI to learn everything, and the ones that use AI so they don't need to learn anything. And I would really encourage everyone to be on the former side of things, and really use AI, embrace it. This is not going to stop, but use it responsibly. And I think start also looking at the cognitive side of things, and every time you engage with an AI tool, really ask yourselves, is this making me mentally stronger, or is this actually impacting somehow my cognitive abilities?
I'll chime in, and I'll say it's use it, and also use it in thinking about mental health. Technology and AI can improve mental health. I saw a quote from a colleague the other day, and he said, mental health clinicians are tired, administrators are tired, and patients are tired. The system is very difficult to manage. And let's add some tools to the toolbox for all of them, and improve patient outcomes and think about ways, creative, ethical, evidence-based ways to use these tools for mental health.
I would just say this is a great, and I think of it as a movement, and I think this movement should be at the forefront of ensuring that AI helps human flourishing.
I love it. I'm going to actually set up an agent when I get home to remind me to write a letter to my mom. How about that?
Good.
Thank you, everybody.